Welcome. Another episode, Dr. J's Beckett Sports Card Insights here with Rich Klein. We're going to talk about a couple of light-hitting but quick-witted and culturally well-known celebrities who got their start in baseball and went on to media fame, Bob Uecker and Joe Garagiola. First, thanks sponsors, Topps Panini Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins and Scott Auctions, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. So here with my I shouldn't say favorite guest because that'll hurt the feelings of the others, but I have no guest or no co-host that is finer or better than Rich Klein. So, Rich, welcome to the show.
And I think that's appropriate to our conversation because when Johnny Carson hosted his final show of The Tonight Show, the guest that had been on more than anybody else was Mr. Baseball, Bob Uecker. So I just consider myself Bob Uecker to your Johnny Carson.
You're not Ed McMahon.
I'm not Ed McMahon. I'm Bob Uecker.
The listeners don't even know who Ed McMahon is. Oh, who's Johnny Carson? Some of them. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's 30 years. You know, think about it. That's almost 30 years ago at this point where he signed off for the last time.
It's more than a generation. So yeah. And when you look at the TV from back in those days, it's not high def. I mean, it looks like it's a home movie. I think it's just not. Anyway, so we're talking about a couple of guys. Bob Uecker's older than me. 10 years older than me. So I'm very well aware of his career. Garagiola, my dad's age. So Well, Uecker's still around. Garagiola passed away. Really nice. Both of them, I think, were nice guys, and they both must have pretty quickly figured out that their future could be in baseball, but not hitting the curveball, apparently, or catching in some cases. Uecker led the league in pass balls, although that was
Phil Necro's fault.
Yeah, perhaps not his fault. But
on the other hand, he also got Phil Necro to a 1.89 ERA in '67, and Necro led the National League, and so he did good work in really helping Phil get confidence in being able to be a full-time knuckleball starter. Of course, he also hit like 153 that year to drag his career average under 200 once and for all. So he got to finish at 199. And Garagiola was actually a decent hitter when he came up, but he probably got the aches and pains of being a catcher. But Garagiola ends his career with the 54 New York Giants and gets a World Series ring in both basically his first and last year of his career. His first year of his career, he's a starting catcher for the 46 Cardinals. And I know he's not part of our discussion, but it makes sense. And I know many people got tired of hearing Tim McCarver every October doing World Series broadcasts. But there's something to be said for Uecker and Garagiola, and then later McCarver, for being a catcher and seeing the whole field in front of you and understanding how the whole game unfolds.
No, it's worse than that. It being a St. Louis Cardinals catcher and seeing, Busch Stadium or whatever they had something before Busch Stadium though. What was the one?
Yeah, it may have been Busch Stadium. It was Sportsman's Park or something like that in the 20s.
But they're all three were Cardinals catchers.
All three Cardinals.
Right in the middle of the country. Would you say that Uecker was one of the first personal catchers?
I think he was. He in a sense he was the first well-known personal catcher, even though it was only for a year, because he caught Bob. As I said, he caught Phil Necro in his final year. So he was. And Uecker is a strange career. I mean, he couldn't hit, except he could hit Sandy Koufax. He has every
right.
Sandy Koufax, he'd be in the Hall of Fame today.
Right. And he says Sandy Koufax shouldn't be because he
right.
Get me out. Well, okay. So Uecker, not a good hitter, and when the knuckleball was really dancing, there may have been some backlash from the other catchers saying we can't catch this guy. He's going to make us look bad. And so, but again, the interplay between offense and defense. Catcher's an important defensive position if you can't catch the knuckler. And apparently Uecker had the ability to laugh it off.
There's something to be said about, Casey Stengel, the famed manager, Yankees, Mets, Brooklyn Dodgers, Boston Braves. When the Mets made their first expansion pick in 1962, Hobie Landreth, he was a catcher. And Stengel's line is something to the effect of, well, you need a catcher, otherwise you're going to have nothing but passed balls.
That's probably true. Okay, so Garagiola, at some point, I think pretty quickly moved into some media kinds of stuff. He had a shtick, but I have spent a little bit of time with him back in the day, and I just always had the impression, again, he was my dad's age, that he was a nice man.
Well, and the thing about Garagiola is when I started following baseball in the mid '60s for the Yankees, he was a Yankees announcer.
Yeah, well, he was a game.
Garagiola's been part of my existence ever since I was literally following baseball. So, I mean, in '67, the Yankees had three announcers, Joe Garagiola, Phil Rizzuto, and Jerry Coleman, all of whom just lasted forever as announcers and baseball personages. Phil Rizzuto was an announcer until the early 90s. Garagiola did stuff forever. He was hosting the Today Show as late as 89 and 90. And Jerry Coleman, until a couple of years ago, until he recently passed, was still announcing at least home games for the San Diego Padres.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think anybody that plays in the big leagues is more amazing than we think. Here's Bob Uecker, who had a career right at 200, batting 200, 1 out of 5, which is, kind of below the Mendoza line but I don't know where the Mendoza line is for catchers, but he apparently had to be good enough that he's in the big leagues. And if he'd be in high school or college, he'd probably be batting 400 or something, because he wasn't terrible, but you're facing the best of the best big league pitchers. Garagiola, kind of same thing. He's more of a 250 hitter. And like I say, he may have just broken down. He was, because he wasn't that old. He retired when he wasn't that old.
Now, and and bringing this back to sports cards, Garagiola has cards in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
And you can get their collection on places like ComC reasonably easy, and it's not super expensive other than the base card. He's a little more expensive than a common, but he doesn't have really any high numbers or any super tough cards. I think 52 tops is probably the most expensive of any garage.
Well, one of the reasons I want to do these two guys together is because they both have some fame into the broader world. Uecker was in a lot of movies and TV and stuff like that, and Joe Garagiola was a Good Morning America or something. He did a bunch of different things, but Garagiola's cards do have a slight, if any, premium. I don't really see much of a premium, whereas Uecker is extremely popular. Do you relate that to regional interest, or?
I think Garagiola cards were more popular when he was announcing.
Yeah.
Now, as we talk about, going back into faded memory, you don't see Garagiola unless you listen to something like a 78 World Series broadcast on YouTube to just go back, if you're a Yankee fan, to those days, like John Newman, who you've interviewed. That's like one of his sweet spots, and he might listen to that occasionally. But that's 40 years ago at this point, when Garagiola was at his peak, and that's when his cards were at the peak. Uecker's still announcing games for the Milwaukee Brewers, and he basically encompasses their entire history, and he's still sharp doing the games. It's one of these things where he's still good, he's still funny, he still has the same voice, and he has a real. We've talked about this with Jim Mountain, or we will talk about this. Is that he also has a 62 rookie parade card, which maybe 75% of the time when I hear about people looking for 62s is the last card people need for their set.
The other distinction I make between those two guys is that Joe Garagiola was a genuinely funny guy, whereas Bob Uecker was a comedian. And so a comedian, I mean, he got more laughs. I mean, I think Joe Garagiola was a warm, friendly, funny guy, and Bob Uecker was drier and funnier, and like you said, more contemporary. And I love the way he can. And they both poked fun at their inability to be an all-star, to be or maybe even to have any whiff at the Hall of Fame.
Right, and for today's generation of many of the podcasters, Bob Uecker's also in the Major League movie as the announcer, just a bit outside, for the ball that goes 50 feet, like 50 Cent through the first pitch there a few years ago, which went we don't know where, so he's remembered for that as well, and Uecker and Garagiola both continue to be somewhat in the hobby. There's Garagiola's business card was a Topps baseball card. He was friends with Cy Berger. And, he had a special, business card made for himself. And Bob Uecker, 25 years after his 63, what I call first card alone, has a reprint card that's really cool for some charity that obviously he had to approve. So they both continue to be involved in the hobby for many years.
Both those cards, I don't know if I picked them up or you picked them up. I think Joe Garagiola sent me his, but you probably picked up the Bob Uecker thing for us to be able to, represent. But, one of the challenges that you and I both have, even though we have really good memory, is that when we picked up something and it was the only one we ever saw, then it's hard to know how truly scarce it is. But if it's the only one we ever saw, we tend to think, gee, maybe that's pretty scarce.
Hey, here's a real life story on that. Reggie's Regiment card. I found digging through one of Audrey Gold. It might have been Steve Gold at that, or Bruce Gold. It was Steve Gold, or it could have been Audrey. Digging through one of their albums, I paid all the $5 for the card. I put in the almanac for $5. That's what we paid for it.
Yeah.
John Slater, who had been doing what they call checklist collection or something like that for our old friend Frank Barney, who thankfully I saw a few Facebook posts from him the other day. So I'm glad to say he's back posting to some extent. John Slater called me or emailed me and said, by the way, I paid $35 for my card 2 weeks ago. You're a little too low at $5. okay, John, I'll raise that card right now. It's a 1-card set. That's easy enough to raise. And so you're right. That was one of the challenges. A card that was legitimately probably a $25, $30, $35 card at the time, probably $50 today. I just happened to pick up because $5 for a card I've never seen before from the late 60s is a sweet spot. Okay, let me just get it. And then, a year later, it's booking at 35. Why? Well, the person who really knows, who collected Reggie Jackson, said, you're way too low.
The one other thing, because you were bringing up, we were talking about the fact that these guys were catchers, and I think that's not by accident, it's not coincidence, but it can just imagine, because I know you and I, in fact, we may have met on the softball field, but the whole idea of a catcher being back there who's like a comedian, and for those listeners who've played a lot, been playing baseball, especially kind of pickup baseball, there's a lot of trash talk, and most of the trash talk, if it comes from the catcher, it's to try to get you off your game and to think about something that's unrelated that's going to make you swing and miss. So can you imagine going up to bat with Bob Uecker being the catcher and him making some wisecracks, and then you're laughing in the middle of trying to hit a curveball or a fastball? I mean, it'd be hilarious.
It is. I mean, even there's a famous story about Yogi Berra telling Hank Aaron he's holding the bat wrong in the middle of the '57 World Series, trying to distract Aaron from hitting the ball. So it's much more common than even we realize.
Well, maybe that's where they honed their comedic talents. The Joe Garagiola thing is, the amazing thing is his not next door neighbor, but he grew up on the same street and is almost exactly the same age as Yogi Berra. And, so that's.
And would Yogi have lasted as popularly long as he did if he didn't have Garagiola telling these stories about him?
I think
maybe embellishing a little.
Because Yogi was not an impressive physical specimen.
No, in fact, Garagiola was more impressive.
You would think, well, hey, this guy looks like a real ball player. Right. No, he and like I say, Garagiola more looked apart. And perhaps when they were teenagers, I think Garagiola deflected this, but it's possible that Garagiola was better when they were teenagers.
Right.
But Yogi really came on strong.
Right. Yogi just. Yeah, he was a better hitter. He was always a better hitter than Garagiola.
Yeah, Rich, I think that's good for those two catchers. I think we'll sign off for today. Always a pleasure visiting with you about Sports Card Insights, fresh and not stale but old. What goes around comes around, listeners. So understanding the past is a good way to have greater understanding of the future. So thanks, Rich. Thanks, listeners. Be back again tomorrow with another. Different episode. We bounce around here, and even with Rich, again, it's fun to just try new things. And if you like some of these episodes, tell me you want more. drjamesbeckett@gmail.com. You can tell Rich too. Rich loves feedback.
Saber Geek on Twitter is perfect.
Saber Geek. Okay, fair enough. So again, talk to you tomorrow.